My daughter bought her mother-in-law a $14,000 kitchen renovation. Brand new cabinets, marble countertops, a farmhouse, sink imported from Italy. She planned it for months, coordinated the contractors, picked out every single fixture. And then, 2 weeks later, she sat across from me at my kitchen table and told me she couldn't help me pay for my insulin. Not the whole month's supply. Just enough to get me through the next 10 days until my Medicare appeal went through. $63. That's what she said she couldn't spare. $63 for the medication that keeps me alive. Let me say that again because I want you to really sit with it. My daughter spent $14,000 renovating her mother-in-law's kitchen, and then she looked her own father in the eye and said she didn't have $63 for his insulin. I'm 67 years old. I spent 38 years as a high school history teacher in Decatur, Georgia. Not a glamorous career. Not a lucrative one. But it was honest work and I loved it. I loved those kids. I loved watching them argue over causes of the Civil War or light up when they finally understood what the New Deal actually meant. I gave everything I had to that classroom, and whatever was left over, I gave to my daughter, Melissa. Her mother, my wife Patricia, passed away when Melissa was 14. Breast cancer. It was fast and it was cruel and it hollowed me out in ways I still can't fully describe. But I had Melissa. She was the reason I didn't fall apart completely. I made her lunches every morning. I went to every school play, every volleyball game, every academic bowl competition. I learned how to braid hair by watching YouTube videos at midnight because I didn't want her to feel like she was missing something just because her mother was gone. I wasn't a rich man. Teachers in Georgia don't retire wealthy. But I put every spare dollar into her college fund. I worked summers tutoring kids in the neighborhood. I drove for a rideshare company on weekends for 3 years just to make sure she could go to the school she wanted without taking on more loans than she could handle. When she graduated from Georgia Tech with an engineering degree, I was the proudest man in that stadium. I stood up and I hollered, and I didn't care who looked at me. She met Brandon during her first job. His family was from old money. His mother, Diane, was the kind of woman who wore linen in July and somehow never looked wrinkled. His father had a name that appeared on the side of a building downtown. They were polite to me the way people are polite to someone they feel sorry for. They asked about my career with the kind of interest you give to a child explaining what they drew in art class. Melissa told me I was being too sensitive. Maybe I was. I bit my tongue and I showed up to their garden parties and I wore my best jacket and I tried. She and Brandon got married 4 years after they met. It was a beautiful wedding, more beautiful than anything I could have paid for, and I was grateful his family helped cover it. I danced with my daughter and I cried and I thought Patricia would have loved every minute of it. What I didn't notice, not right away, was how much Melissa was changing. It was gradual. The phone calls got shorter. She stopped asking about my health, my garden, my former students. Clothing. End quote. My clothing. When we talked, it was always about her new house, their upcoming trip to Portugal, the renovation plans, the dinner parties, and I tried to be happy for her. I told myself this was what I had worked for. Parted. This was the better life I wanted her to have. But slowly, I started to feel like I was becoming a footnote. The father from the smaller chapter. The one with the modest pension and the 2009 Camry with 200,000 miles on it. I was the part of her story she had moved past. End quote. End quote. A months ago, I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. My doctor put me on insulin immediately. My blood sugar had been dangerously high for longer than I realized. He sat me down and told me without this medication I was looking at real trouble within a year. Kidney damage. Nerve damage. He did not sugarcoat it. I was on Medicare, but there was a coverage gap, what they call the donut hole. My supplemental plan had a dispute with the pharmacy over billing codes. It was a bureaucratic mess that took months to untangle. And in the meantime, I was paying out of pocket. My insulin cost me $220 a month. On a teacher's pension of $1,600 a month, after rent and utilities and food, that was not a small number. I managed for a while. I gave up cable. I stopped going to the barber as often. I ate more eggs and less meat. I was doing what I had always done, stretching every dollar, until it was nearly transparent. But then October came. My car needed a repair I hadn't anticipated. $340 for a brake job. I had the money, but it wiped out my buffer completely, and my insulin refill was due in 9 days. I thought about it for a long time before I called Melissa. I had never once asked her for money. Not when the water heater broke. The water heater broke. Not when I had a dental emergency 2 years ago and paid the dentist in installments. I was stubborn about it. Maybe too stubborn. But this was different. This was my health. And 10. I-10. She answered on the third ring. She sounded distracted, a little breathless, like she was multitasking. Hey, Daddy, what's up? I asked about Brandon. I asked about their dog, a retriever named Scout. I was stalling because I didn't know how to begin. Then, I just said it plainly. I told her about the billing dispute, about the gap in coverage, about the brake repair cleaning out my cushion. I told her I needed $63 to cover the difference on my insulin until the Medicare issue got sorted out. I told her I'd pay her back before the end of the month. There was a pause, not a long one, maybe 5 seconds. But it felt like standing in a hallway watching a door close very slowly. Daddy, she said, and her voice had that careful tone in it, the one that means she's already decided but is choosing her words. Things have just been really tight for us lately. We have a lot going on financially right now. Brandon's been dealing with some stuff at work and we've had some unexpected expenses. I didn't say anything. She continued, I don't want to get into it all right now, but I really can't do it this month. I'm sorry. I really am. I told her I understood. I said, of course, sweetheart, don't worry about it. I apologized for asking. I hung up the phone and I sat in my kitchen for a very long time looking at a calendar on the wall that Patricia had bought at a church bazaar 22 years ago. It was a picture of a lighthouse in Maine. I'd kept using it long after it stopped being the right year because I liked the picture. 9 days. I had 9 days of insulin left. I started rationing. I know you're not supposed to. My doctor had told me very clearly that adjusting insulin doses on my own was dangerous. But I didn't know what else to do. I cut back on carbohydrates as much as I could, and I stretched the doses and I prayed. 3 days later, I was sitting in my living room in the evening when something made me pick up my phone and scroll through Facebook. I almost never did that anymore. It felt like watching a highlight reel of lives I wasn't invited to. But I scrolled anyway, the way you do when you're restless and sad. And then I saw the photos. Melissa had posted an album. 42 pictures. The caption read, "Finally finished. Diane's kitchen reveal so worth every second of planning. We love you, Diane." I sat up slowly and I went through every single photograph. Bright white shaker cabinets going all the way to the ceiling. A massive kitchen island with waterfall marble edges. Pendant lights that looked like they belonged in an architecture magazine. A farmhouse sink so deep and wide, you could bathe a small child in it. New hardwood floors, stainless appliances, a built-in wine rack. The comments were full of fire emojis and exclamation points. People calling Melissa the best daughter-in-law in the world. Brandon's aunt writing, "Our family is so blessed to have you." I looked at that kitchen for a long time. I knew roughly what a renovation like that cost. I knew because 2 years ago I had gotten quotes to repair the rotting subfloor in my bathroom. Contractors don't come cheap. That kitchen, the cabinets alone were probably $6,000 or $7,000. And my daughter had told me she couldn't spare $63 for my insulin. I put my phone face down on the end table. I closed my eyes. I didn't feel anger right away. What I felt first was something quieter and more devastating than anger. I felt like I finally understood something I had been pretending not to see for years. I had been so proud of everything she'd built, so grateful for every hour she still gave me, that I had convinced myself the growing distance was just the natural order of things. Kids grow up, kids move on. That's what you raise them for. But this wasn't that. This was something else. This was me being sorted, filed under a different category than the people she needed to impress. The next few days were hard. I was monitoring my blood sugar more carefully than usual, checking it 4 times a day, trying to catch any spike before it got dangerous. I was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, I heard a knock at my front door. I wasn't expecting anyone. My neighbor sometimes checked in, but she usually texted first. I thought maybe it was a delivery. I shuffled to the door in my slippers and opened it. Standing on my front porch was Brandon's father, Gerald. Gerald was 71 years old, broad-shouldered, with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from spending decades making real decisions. We had spoken maybe a dozen times over the years. Always cordial, always brief. He had never once come to my home. He was holding a paper bag from the grocery store and he looked, for lack of a better word, uncomfortable. Not cold, just uncomfortable. End quote. Like a man who had rehearsed what he was going to say but wasn't sure the words were right. "Earl?" he said. "That's my name, Earl Dawson. Can I come in?" I stepped back and let him in. My living room is small and full of books, and there are plants on every windowsill because Patricia loved plants and I kept them going for 23 years after she died. I cleared a stack of papers off the armchair and told him to sit. He set the grocery bag on the coffee table. Inside were 2 bottles of orange juice, a loaf of bread, a box of crackers, and a small bag of peanuts. And underneath those, wrapped in a paper towel, was a prescription bottle. I looked at it. Then I looked at him. He said, "It took me a few days to figure out how to do this without stepping on toes. But I got a 90-day supply from the manufacturer's patient assistance program. Your doctor just had to sign off. I had my physician call in the favor. It's the same insulin, same dosage. It's yours." I didn't understand what I was looking at for a moment. He said, "I owe you an explanation." He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and he looked at the floor. "A couple of weeks ago, Diane and I had a disagreement about the kitchen renovation. I thought it was excessive. She thought it was a wonderful gesture. We argued about it, and Melissa's name came up, and Brandon said something I haven't been able to stop thinking about since." He paused. He looked up at me. He said that Melissa had told him your pension was much larger than it appeared, that you had investments you didn't talk about, that you were, and I'm quoting now, comfortable enough to not need anyone's help. He told Brandon that her father didn't like to spend his money and that if he ever asked for anything, to remember that he could actually afford it. I felt the air leave the room. She told Brandon that? Gerald nodded slowly. I didn't know whether to believe it. It struck me as wrong. I've seen the way you live, Earl. I'm not a fool. So I asked Brandon directly. I said, "When's the last time Melissa's father asked for anything?" And he told me about the phone call. "Your phone call, eh?" He said Melissa told him you'd called asking for $60 and she turned you down because you didn't really need it, you just wanted to see if she'd give it to you. I sat very still, Gerald said. I went and looked at the renovation invoice myself. $14,200. Melissa managed every bit of it. She was so proud of it, and Diane loved it. And for a few days I let myself be happy about it too. But I kept coming back to that phone call. A man doesn't call his daughter for $60 worth of insulin because he's testing her. Something was wrong. He reached into his jacket pocket and laid a folded check on the coffee table. "That's not charity," he said. "That's me correcting a wrong that happened in my vicinity. You use it for whatever you need." I looked at the check. I'm not going to tell you the amount except to say it was more than I expected and more than I deserved, and it took everything in me not to cry in front of that man right then and there. But what hit me harder than the money was what he said next. I raised Brandon to believe that respect is something you show to the people who earned it, not the people who can afford it. I don't know when he forgot that, and I don't know when Melissa decided you were someone she could afford to dismiss. But I'm not going to let that stand without saying something. He stood up. "I'm going to talk to both of them, but I wanted you to know first. You're not invisible, Earl. Not to me." He left. I sat in that chair for a long time after the door closed. The following week, Gerald and Diane sat down with Brandon and Melissa together. I wasn't there for it. Gerald told me about it afterward. In 10, he had laid it all out plainly, the patient assistance program he'd had to navigate because her father didn't have his insulin, the check he'd written, the story Melissa had told about my supposed hidden wealth, which was as fictional as anything I'd ever taught in a classroom. Melissa, from what Gerald told me, went very quiet. She didn't deny it. She sat with her hands in her lap, and she didn't say a word for almost 5 minutes. Then she started to cry, and she said she didn't know why she'd said those things. She said she'd been embarrassed. Embarrassed that her father drove an old car and lived in a small house and had needed to ask for help. She'd been afraid of what Brandon's family thought of her, afraid that my circumstances reflected on her somehow, and so she had rewritten me, made me someone richer and more difficult than I was, so that saying no to me seemed reasonable. She had turned me into a caricature to protect her own image. And in doing so, she had left me rationing insulin alone in my house. Brandon was quietly furious with her, not because of the money, because of the lie. Ta, 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 ta. He was a straightforward man, whatever his faults, and discovering that his wife had been managing a false narrative about her own father shook him badly. They went into counseling shortly after. About 3 weeks after Gerald's visit, Melissa came to my house alone. She sat at my kitchen table in the same chair she used to do homework in, and she looked around at the plants and the books and the lighthouse calendar, and I watched her see it all like she was seeing it for the first time. She said, "Daddy, I'm so sorry. I don't know how to explain what I was thinking except that I wasn't really thinking at all. I was just trying to manage how people saw me, and I didn't stop to think about what I was doing to you. I'm ashamed of it. I am genuinely ashamed." I didn't tell her it was fine, because it wasn't fine. I told her the truth. I said, "Melissa, I spent 38 years teaching teenagers that the most important thing you can do in your life is be honest about who you are and where you come from. I never asked you to be poor. I never asked you to live the way I live. I just asked you to remember that your father is a real person. Not an inconvenience. Not a liability. A person. She cried. She cried the way she cried when she was a little girl, and she knew she'd really done something wrong, not performing sadness but feeling it. I handed her a box of tissues. That's the kind of father I am. I handed her the tissues even when she was the one who hurt me. I didn't take her back immediately. I want to be clear about that. I told her we were going to need time, that she had some things to prove, not to me, but to herself, that I loved her the same as I always had, but love doesn't mean pretending something didn't happen. She called me every Sunday after that, without fail, just to talk, about nothing important sometimes, about her week, about Scout, about a book she'd read. She started coming by on Saturdays to have coffee. She started asking about my health again, my blood sugar, my doctor appointments. She came with me to one of them. She sat in the little plastic chair next to mine, and she took notes. And, Gerald and I developed something I never expected. A friendship, a real one. We started meeting for breakfast on the first Wednesday of every month at a diner on the east side of town. And he ordered the same thing every time: scrambled eggs, wheat toast, black coffee. We talked about our wives, the ones we'd lost and the one he still had. We talked about our kids and the mystery of how you can do everything right and still end up surprised by who they become. He was good company. He was honest and direct, and he didn't waste words. One morning over breakfast, he said, "You know, I looked down on you for years. I thought Melissa had married beneath herself when I had it exactly backwards. She married into money and forgot what it means to be decent. If you never forgot, even when it cost you, I told him I appreciated that. I told him I was still working on forgiving my daughter. He said, "Take your time, but don't let it harden you. Melissa is fighting her way back to herself. Give her the room." And I thought about that for a long time. There's a moment I keep coming back to. About 2 months after everything happened, Melissa brought her daughter to visit me. Her daughter, my granddaughter, Clara. She was 4 years old and she had Patricia's eyes, and she walked into my living room and immediately went directly to the plants on the windowsill like she'd been there 100 times before. She touched the leaves of the fiddle leaf fig and she said, very seriously, "These need water." I said, "You're right. Would you like to help me?" She said yes, and we spent 40 minutes watering every plant in that house. She narrated the whole thing. "This one is thirsty. This one is happy. This one is sleeping. Sleeping. This one is sleeping. This one is sleeping. I want to come back and water them next week," she told me when they left. She has come back every Saturday since. My daughter is working on herself. Some weeks are better than others. She slipped once, made an excuse to skip a Sunday call, and then I didn't hear from her for 12 days. I didn't chase her. I just waited. She called eventually and she apologized and she said she was scared I wouldn't answer. I said, Melissa, I always answer. But you have to actually dial. The Medicare dispute was finally resolved 4 months after it started. I'm fully covered now. Gerald had connected me with a patient advocate, a retired nurse named Helen who knew how to navigate the system. She got it sorted in 3 weeks after spending 5 minutes on the phone where I'd been getting nowhere for 5 months. Gerald gave me her number over scrambled eggs and wheat toast one Wednesday morning and said simply, call her. She's good at this. I called her. She was very good at this. I'm still in my house. Still have the lighthouse calendar on the wall. Still drive the 2009 Camry, though I did finally get the brakes properly fixed. My blood sugar is well managed. I take my insulin every day at the same time, and I don't have to ration it or worry about it. Some evenings I sit on my front porch and I think about the man I was before all of this happened. A man who had spent his whole adult life making himself smaller so his daughter could feel bigger, sacrificing silently and calling it love. I don't regret the sacrifices. I regret the silence. I should have told her what I needed, not just that one time when I was desperate, but all the times before. I should have let her see me as a full person, not just a backdrop to her story. Because here's the thing about children. And if you're a parent listening to me, I need you to hear this. If you spend 30 years being invisible so they can shine, some of them will forget that you're there. Not out of cruelty, out of habit. You train them to see the light and not the lamp. Melissa is learning to see the lamp now. It's slow work, but I see her trying. Clara came over last Saturday. We watered the plants. Then she climbed into my lap in the big chair by the window, and I read her 2 chapters of a book about a brave little mouse who lived in a library. She fell asleep before the end of the 2nd chapter with her head on my chest and her hand wrapped around my thumb. I sat there for a long time without moving. I thought about Patricia, about how she would have loved this child with everything she had. I talked to the lighthouse on the kitchen wall, the way I do sometimes when I need her. I said, she's going to be all right, Patty. And I think Melissa is too. It's just going to take some time. My daughter told her mother-in-law's contractor to spare no expense. She told her own father she couldn't spare $63. But that was a year ago. And that version of my daughter, the one who had decided I was something to manage rather than someone to love, I think she frightened herself. I think the look on Gerald's face when he laid out what she had done frightened her in a way that nothing else could have. I didn't make her suffer for it. That was never the point. The point was that I needed her to understand the distance she had put between us and choose to close it. Not because I demanded it, but because she finally saw it. She's closing it, slowly, Saturday by Saturday. And I'm still here. Same small house, same old car, same lighthouse on the wall. Just a man who spent a career teaching young people that history matters, that where you come from shapes who you become, finally understanding that lesson applied to him too. I know what I'm worth now. Not in dollars. Not in kitchens or trucks or any of the things people buy to show other people how they're doing. But I'm worth a granddaughter who talks to sleeping plants. And I'm worth a Wednesday morning breakfast with a man I once thought was my adversary. I'm worth a daughter who is still fighting her way back to me. My daughter spent $14,000 on someone else's kitchen and told me she didn't have $63 for my insulin. And that day she gave me something I hadn't had in a long time. She made me stop pretending, stop shrinking, stop letting love be used as a reason to disappear. I closed a door that evening, and I opened a different one, and that's the one Clara walks through every Saturday to come water the plants.